I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. I love you so much I walked into Lavetta expecting nothing more than a quiet plate of pasta, a glass of wine, and maybe a little tiramisu to keep me company. My daughter had canceled our dinner that morning. Her text short and sweet. Something came up. Let's reschedule. But the moment I stepped inside, I saw her. She was sitting at a candlelit table near the window, laughing like a schoolgirl over a glass of champagne. Beside her, my son-in-law, his parents, and a table full of plates that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. The sound of her laughter felt like a slap, not because she was happy, but because she'd worked so hard to make sure I wasn't there to share it. I stood frozen by the host stand, my coat still damp from the drizzle outside. Before I could move, the waiter, sweet familiar Marco, smiled and said, "Mrs. Wallace, good to see you. The usual table. And don't worry, we'll put it on your card like always." The words hit harder than the sight of her. Your card like always. My pulse went cold. That card had been for emergencies, groceries when the baby was born, gas money during Sarah's unpaid maternity leave. I had handed it to her without a second thought, because that's what mothers do when their child says they're struggling. I had never once asked how she used it. Now, looking at the designer bag she'd once claimed was secondhand and the gold watch glinting on Derek's wrist, I realized this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a one-time slip. I thought about the dinners I'd missed in the past year, the 2 busy weekends, the next time holidays. Had they all been spent like this? My daughter playing hostess with my money while I sat home wondering what I'd done wrong. The hostess offered to seat me, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. I watched her, my own child, lean in to whisper something to her mother-in-law, both of them giggling over whatever private joke they shared. My chair at that table had been quietly given away a long time ago. I stayed where I was, half hidden by a potted olive tree near the host stand, my coat still clutched tight around me. My pulse thudded in my ears, the clinking glasses and low murmur of the restaurant fading into background noise. All I could hear was Marco's voice from moments ago. "On your card like always." It pulled me backward in time to the afternoon I'd handed that card to her. She'd stood in my kitchen, baby on her hip, eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, I don't know how we're going to make it this month. Groceries, formula." Derek's check was short, and she'd stopped, biting her lip like it hurt her to even ask. I'd felt such a rush of maternal purpose. Of course she'd come to me. Of course I could help. I'd opened my wallet, slipped the shiny silver card into her palm, and said, "Just for emergencies. Sweetheart, I trust you." That word trust sat bitter on my tongue now. I thought of the Sunday dinners we used to have, the way she'd always call me Mama when she wanted a second helping of roast potatoes, the birthday toast where we'd lock eyes and I'd feel certain she knew how much I loved her, the late-night calls when she'd say she just needed to hear my voice. Those memories jostled against the scene in front of me, her leaning toward Derek's mother, laughing like she belonged more to that family than to me. My mind kept flicking between the two images, past and present, like someone shuffling cards in a cruel magic trick. I'd always told myself she was busy, that if she seemed distant, it was because life was overwhelming for her. New baby, new house, a husband trying to make his career work. I'd never once considered that the distance was deliberate, that maybe I wasn't being overlooked, maybe I was being cut out, and now here was the proof. She hadn't just canceled on me, she'd replaced me. I felt the first hot spark of anger push through the hurt. I'd spent years covering little gaps for them. A late rent check here, new coats for the kids there, no fanfare, no lectures, just quiet help. I told myself it was love. That's what love was, wasn't it? Showing up even when no one clapped for you. But as I watched them clink glasses over whatever they were celebrating, I realized love without respect is nothing but servitude. And I'd been a very well-trained servant. I pressed my palm against my chest, forcing a steady breath. I couldn't confront her here. Not yet. I needed to understand the full picture. How long had this been going on? How much had they taken? And most importantly, How could I make sure it never happened again? Somewhere between the shock and the slow, creeping clarity, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. Tonight wasn't about reclaiming my seat at their table. I shifted just enough to see around the olive tree without catching her eye. They were halfway through a bottle of wine I knew by heart. Barolo, the one that cost nearly $160 a bottle here. She'd once told me it was too rich for her palate when I had ordered it for my birthday dinner. Then I saw it. Slung over the back of her chair was that buttery leather handbag she'd sworn she bought secondhand online. I'd believed her because I wanted to, but even from here, I could see the stitching, the sheen. I'd seen the exact same bag in a boutique window for $2,400. When Derek raised his arm to get the waiter's attention, a flash of gold caught the light, a heavy, expensive-looking watch. Not the modest stainless steel one he'd worn for years. It looked new, fresh from the display case. Something ugly began to unfurl in my stomach. They weren't just treating themselves tonight. They were comfortable doing it. Too comfortable. Marco passed by with a tray of espresso cups, and I stopped him with a hand on his arm. "How often have they been in lately?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He hesitated, glancing toward their table. "A few times these past weeks," he said finally. "Always nice dinners, champagne, the seafood tower." He paused, then added, "And yes, we put it on your tab. Ma'am, like always." Like always. The phrase hit harder this time. This wasn't their first indulgence on my dime. This was a pattern. I thought back over the last 2 months. The sudden invitations for takeout nights at her house when she said she was too exhausted to cook. I'd show up with paper bags full of pad thai or pizza, thinking I was doing my part to help. Meanwhile, maybe she and Derek had already been out earlier that week eating oysters and steak at my expense. And then, almost too perfectly, I remembered the week she'd told me their oven was broken. I'd offered to help pay for the repair, but she'd waved me off, saying they were making do with the microwave for now. Funny, she hadn't mentioned they were making do with fettuccine and truffle risotto, too. I watched her lift her glass for another toast, her fingers glittering with a ring I didn't recognize. And it clicked. This wasn't about a single betrayal. It was a slow bleed. Months, if not years in the making. She'd tested my boundaries in little ways, each time pushing a bit further, each time confirming I'd let it slide. And I had. Every time. I slipped into a seat at the small bench by the host stand, far enough to stay out of her peripheral vision, but close enough to watch without looking obvious. The restaurant hummed with soft jazz and the gentle clink of cutlery, but my focus tunneled in on that table. From here, I could see every little performance. The way she leaned in toward Derek's parents, nodding at whatever story his father was telling, the exaggerated gestures when she described some imaginary crisis, her hand fluttering over her chest like she'd narrowly survived a tragedy, the casual way she placed her hand on the wine list, making a show of letting them pick when she'd already decided. It was like watching a version of my daughter I didn't recognize, or maybe a version I'd refused to see. A hostess, a provider, the generous daughter-in-law who spared no expense. Only I knew whose expense it really was. I studied Derek, too. He wasn't oblivious. Every time a new dish arrived, he gave that little approving nod people give when they know they're indulging in something special. Not a hint of guilt. No subtle check over the shoulder to see if his wife's mother was watching. Just a man enjoying the spoils. I could have walked out right then, gone home, poured a glass of wine, and told myself ignorance was easier. But the longer I watched, the more I realized I needed to understand this whole picture before I made my move. If I just barged over, she'd have excuses ready. She'd cry, maybe get angry, maybe even turn it into a joke about silly mom overreacting. And if I didn't have proof, I'd be painted as paranoid. So I stayed put, ordered a coffee from the bar, stirred in sugar I didn't need just to keep my hands busy. I let the minutes stretch while I watched her transform herself into the kind of woman I'd spent years trying to help her be stable, confident, generous. The difference was she'd built it all on a foundation of my money. I thought of the times she'd turned down my invitations for dinner, claiming she needed a quiet night in. Of the weekends, she said Derek was working late, so she couldn't make the drive to visit me. How many of those nights were actually spent in places like this, in outfits I'd never seen, wearing jewelry I hadn't bought every new bite of food she took, every glass of wine she poured. Every bright false laugh added another layer to the truth settling in my chest. She'd been living in a world I funded without ever being invited inside it. I took a slow sip of my coffee, tasting nothing, feeling everything. They thought they were untouchable, that my love was a bottomless well they could draw from forever without ever looking down to see if I was still there. I gathered my courage and approached the tall man in a crisp white shirt and black tie, standing near the bar Gabriel Rodriguez, the manager. I'd known him for years. He'd always greeted me warmly when I came in for my quiet dinners. "Gabriel," I said softly, "I need your help with something." Sensitive, his eyes flickered with recognition, and he guided me to a quiet corner. "Of course, Mrs. Wallace, what can I do for you? Would it be possible to print me a list of recent charges made to my account here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. His polite smile faltered. "May I ask why?" I didn't flinch. "Because I believe someone's been using it without my authorization, and because the account is in my name." His brows drew together, but he nodded. "If you can show me identification, I'll see what I can do." While he disappeared into the back, I glanced toward their table. My daughter was showing Derek's mother something on her phone, laughing so hard she had to dab at her eyes with her napkin. I couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that with me. Gabriel returned a few minutes later, sliding an envelope onto the bar discreetly. "I'm not supposed to release this," he said quietly, "but I understand the situation. Please, just be careful." Inside were printed receipts from the last 2 months. My eyes moved down the list. October 3rd, $462. Seafood platter, champagne. October 15th, $380. Barolo, prime rib, lobster ravioli. October 27th, $512. Caviar service, tiramisu, multiple cocktails. November 4th, $298. Brunch, mimosas, desserts. And on it went. Every single date lined up with one of her too sick to cook nights, or the time she'd suggested we just order takeout at her place. The total $3,800, nearly $4,000. Not groceries, not emergencies, not even practical purchases that could be excused as necessities. Just indulgence layered on indulgence on my dime. I traced the dates with my finger, each one a tiny betrayal I hadn't seen until now. My mind replayed all the evenings I'd sat at home with a reheated frozen dinner, telling myself my daughter must be too tired or stressed to visit. And all along she'd been right here, savoring creme brulee and sipping champagne, wearing her best smile for someone else's benefit. A part of me wanted to march over, throw the receipts down in front of her, and demand an explanation. But another part, the part that had been quiet for too long, told me to wait. This wasn't just about tonight. This was a bigger picture, and I needed every piece of it before I made my move. I slipped the envelope into my purse, the paper edges sharp against my fingers. Information was power, and now I had the beginnings of a weapon. From across the room, their laughter swelled again, and I let it wash over me without flinching. They didn't know it yet, but the ground under their feet had already started to shift. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, its weight pressing into my purse like a silent dare. Now. "What are you going to do with me?" I returned to my corner seat, careful to keep my profile hidden. The plan was still forming in my mind. Collect proof, then watch the unraveling. But plans rarely go untouched by reality. From my vantage point, I caught a flicker of movement, my daughter pulling out her phone. Her screen lit her face as she tilted it just enough for me to see the faint, familiar grid of Instagram. She framed the table with practiced ease, angling her wine glass toward the candlelight. Derek leaned in, grinning. His mother raised her champagne flute, a perfect picture of luxury. If she posted it, half the people we knew would see it, and by morning, she'd have already made excuses for any fallout. "Oh, Mom saw that picture. I was just joking. We didn't even eat all that." It was a celebration for Derek's parents. She was good at smoothing the rough edges of her behavior with little lies dressed as misunderstandings. The thought made my teeth clench. Gabriel reappeared beside me, his tone quieter this time. "Mrs. Wallace, I'll be honest. If they've been regulars here for weeks, they might notice I spoke to you. I don't want trouble." "Neither do I," said, holding his gaze. "And you won't get any, but I may need to come back for more records later." His hesitation was palpable, the way people look when they're deciding if your side of the story is the one worth protecting. After a beat, he nodded once. Then I made my mistake. I looked back toward the table just as my daughter turned her head. For the briefest second, our eyes met. Her smile faltered only slightly before she masked it with another laugh. She said something to Derek, who glanced around the restaurant. I dropped my gaze to my coffee, my heart rate kicking up. Would she come over? Would she pretend she'd just spotted me, act surprised, invite me to join them out of politeness? Or worse? Would she leave before I could gather more information? I kept my posture loose, casual, as if I were just another patron killing time before a friend arrived. My phone sat face down beside me. If she approached, I'd let her speak first. But instead of standing, she simply picked up her phone again. Her thumb moved quickly over the screen. Then she set it down. I wondered if she was sending a text to me. Maybe something syrupy to cover her tracks. I didn't check. Let her wonder why I wasn't responding. She almost caught me watching again. I lowered my eyes and decided to let my next actions do the talking. I ordered another plain coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup like it was an anchor. I needed warmth. But more than that, I needed stillness. The kind that lets your thoughts sort themselves into rows. What happened? What it means? What comes next? I let the restaurant blur and thought about the smaller ways I'd trained them to expect everything. The rent just for 1 month that turned into 3. Coats for the grandkids in October because sizes changed so fast. The temporary cell plan I added her to when Derek switched carriers and somehow never removed. The way I'd slip cash into her hand after Sunday dinner. Whispering, "Don't tell him." Like I was part of a secret sisterhood instead of an ATM with lipstick. That wasn't kindness. That was fear dressed up as generosity. Fear she'd pull away if I didn't prop up the show. I took a breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. Quiet doesn't mean weak. I told myself, quiet means precise. Tonight wasn't about punishing her in public. It was about waking myself up in private. I pulled a napkin toward me and started a list. Not sentimental, practical. 1. Freeze the card. Call bank at 8:45 p.m. 2. Pull bank statements. Highlight every emergency. 3. Remove her as authorized user anywhere she still lingers. 4. Change online passwords she set up to help me. 5. Calendar a meeting with my attorney. 6. Document everything. Roadmaps save you when your heart wants to sprint into traffic. Write it down, then step where the lines tell you. My phone buzzed on the table, face down. I didn't turn it over. Whatever she'd typed would be sugar. "Mom, so sorry about tonight. Rain check, love you." Love me, they loved my money more than me. That sentence didn't bruise this time. It clarified. Behind the bar, glassware chimed as someone stacked coupes. I focused on that sound, steady and harmless, across the room. Another burst of laughter rose from their table, her laugh ringing higher than the others, as if she needed to prove something. I used to chase that sound. Now it just told me where she was standing in a life she'd built with my scaffolding. I thought of the last year, of how I'd started making myself small to fit into her new rooms. I'd praise budget hacks while I paid for their soft landings. I'd accept cancellations with grace and send a casserole anyway, hoping warmth could cross a locked door. Being alone is better than being used. The sentence landed like boots on solid ground. If I had to pick between an empty table and a crowded room where I'm only valuable when I'm swiping, I'd choose the empty table. At least the bill's honest. I checked the time, 8:20 p.m. I needed to make my call to the bank before they finished dinner. My pulse stepped up, not with panic, but with readiness. I took another sip, set the cup down carefully, smoothed the napkin list flat, and slipped it into my purse like a promise. Another small step. I opened my banking app and toggled alerts to all transactions. A bell for every attempt, every decline. Receipts are better than apologies. They don't forget overnight. In the window, I caught my reflection. Older, yes, but steadier than I'd seen in years. I have carried heavier nights than this. I have buried dreams and planted new ones out of their ashes. I can carry the sound of a declined card. I stood, stepped to a quieter corner, and made the call to my bank. The representative was professional and understanding when I explained that I needed to freeze a card immediately. "Can we schedule it for 8:45 p.m. tonight?" I asked, my voice calm and collected. "Of course, Mrs. Wallace," she replied. "The card will be frozen at exactly 8:45 p.m. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight?" "No, that's all. Thank you for your help." I ended the call and checked the time again. 8:30 p.m. 15 minutes until my plan went into action. I straightened, shoulders back, chin level. This wasn't revenge. This was a reset. Respect, like trust, must be earned. I'd stopped paying the subscription. I watched as they ordered dessert tiramisu for Sarah, flourless chocolate cake for Derek, and espresso all around. I imagined the moment when the bill arrived, when they'd hand over my card like it was their right, only to have the waiter return with a polite, "I'm sorry, it's been declined." I wanted to see the exact second the confidence drained from their faces. The waiter lifted the black folio from their table with a dancer's grace. The check was en route to the truth. I breathed in slow and deep and felt my center click into place. The trap was set. The waiter carried the black check folio to their table. His smile polite, practiced. I didn't need to hear the words to know he was saying something about no rush and whenever you're ready. My eyes flicked to the clock above the bar. 8:45 on the dot. The trap was set. I expected the reaction to be quick. Card handed over. A moment's pause. The return with the decline. But instead, they lingered. Derek leaned back in his chair, elbows wide as if holding court. My daughter was speaking low to his parents, her tone different now, not airy and light, but weighted. I tilted my head, trying to read lips. Maxed out was easy to catch, then credit cards, then savings. Derek's voice dropped so low I could barely make out the words, but the phrase "on life support" reached me clear as a bell. My pulse didn't spike this time. Instead, there was a strange stillness, the way the air feels before a summer storm finally breaks. They weren't just leaning on my card for a luxury dinner tonight. They were leaning on it for their very image. The dinners, the handbags, the watch, the champagne. All the glitter they paraded in front of friends and on social media was balanced on a teetering stack of debt. My card wasn't a gift. It was their oxygen mask. And now I'd turned off the air. The waiter finally returned, and Derek slipped my card from his wallet, my card, like it belonged to him, and handed it over without hesitation. I caught the gleam of the silver strip in the restaurant light and thought of the afternoon I'd signed the back of it, never imagining it would one day live in his pocket. While they waited, my daughter reached for her phone again. She wasn't smiling this time. She tapped the screen, glanced toward the entrance, then toward the bar. A flash of awareness passed over her face, and she looked away quickly, focusing on her water glass. The waiter reappeared at their table, his expression the same neutral courtesy he gave everyone. But I saw the tiniest hesitation before he spoke. Derek frowned. My daughter leaned in, her brow furrowing. Eleanor looked down at her purse as if hoping she'd imagined the words. I could guess exactly what had been said. "I'm sorry. It's been declined." Derek reached for his own wallet. I saw him count out a few bills, then shake his head and tuck them back inside. Not enough. My daughter rummaged through her bag, pulling out a smaller wallet, flipping through cards. She glanced at Derek again, her lips pressed tight. I sipped my coffee, slow and steady, watching them shuffle through their options like gamblers, realizing the house always wins in the end. In that moment, they weren't the polished couple in curated Instagram photos. They weren't the power hosts treating the in-laws to an extravagant night. They were just two people caught without a safety net, suddenly aware of how far they'd fallen. The waiter lingered a moment too long at their table before retreating toward the kitchen. I caught the quick look he sent toward the bar, toward me, as he passed. It wasn't pity exactly, more like the acknowledgement of someone who knows they're part of a scene bigger than they signed up for. I motioned for Gabriel. He approached quietly, slipping behind the bar like a man who'd been in this position before. "How bad is it?" I kept my voice low. He hesitated, scanning the room. "You saw the receipts I printed earlier," he said. "But if we're talking total over the past 2 months, it's $3,800. Every charge at the highest end of the menu: champagne, imported seafood, wine by the bottle, not the glass." My stomach sank, but not from shock. I think part of me already knew the number would be obscene. This wasn't about one dinner. It was about a lifestyle they couldn't afford, dressed up as tradition, hosted on my generosity. "They never order simply," he added. "It's always for show for the table. And they always mention that Mom's taking care of it. Mom, not my mother-in-law, not a friend. Mom, like my name was just another accessory to pull out when it fit the image." I thought of all the groceries that $3,800 could have bought, the home repairs I'd been putting off, the small trips I'd told myself I couldn't justify. It wasn't just the money, it was the choice. Their choice to spend it in ways that kept me outside the picture. Across the room, I saw Derek checking his watch, his jaw tight. My daughter was leaning in toward her mother-in-law, whispering quickly, her face pale. She wasn't touching her champagne anymore. The bubbles had gone flat. I wondered if she was tallying up in her head the nights they'd used that card, realizing each one had led her here, to this moment, in this restaurant, with me sitting a few yards away. The irony wasn't lost on me. All that money spent trying to look untouchable, and now they couldn't even touch the check without my say-so. Gabriel's voice brought me back. "Do you want me to call them a cab when this is over?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, let them figure that out." He gave a small, knowing nod before stepping away. I stayed seated, my coffee now cold, my hand still wrapped around the cup. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. They had counted on me to be the quiet, unquestioning provider, and I had been until tonight. Gabriel had just confirmed it. $3,800 burned on my emergency card, and the check was coming due like a thunderhead. I'm not impulsive by nature. I'm methodical. I folded the printed receipts so the total showed on top, slid them into the envelope, then opened my phone and took photos of each page. Front, back, date visible. I emailed them to myself with the subject line, "Non-authorized charges, Levetta evidence. Copies live in 3 places, don't disappear. Quiet doesn't mean weak, it means documented." Then I tapped the bank app. Alerts set to all transactions. Location share off, Face ID on. The freeze still set for 8:45 p.m. Blue toggle glowing like a tiny blade. I checked the time. 8:46 p.m. The card was now frozen. I caught Marco as he passed with espresso. "Quick timing question," I said lightly. "When do they usually ask for the check, before or after dessert?" He glanced toward their table. "After dessert, ma'am. They like to linger, but the waiter already dropped the folio. He'll return any minute." "Perfect," I said, and I meant it. I did one more small protective thing. I texted myself a note. Witnesses present. Manager Gabriel Rodriguez. Tall, dark tie. Waiter, curly hair, blue eyes. Marco, time of decline, 8:45 p.m. If anyone tried to spin this later into me being hysterical, I'd have more than memory to stand on. I shifted to a two-top in their line of sight. Not too close, not confrontational. If you want power back, you don't beg for a seat. You choose your vantage point. I set my coffee down, centered the envelope in front of me like a placard, and straightened my shoulders. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. Across the room, my daughter wasn't laughing now. She was whispering to Derek, chin tucked, eyes darting. His parents sat very still, the way people do when they sense a fault line under the tablecloth. I felt a flicker of something that wasn't quite pity. Call it recognition. I'd felt that sting the moment you realize the person you counted on has decided to count for herself. The phone buzzed. A banner slid across the screen. Attempted transaction $612. Declined. Then another. Attempted transaction $74. Declined. The tiny bells I had armed earlier rang like distant church chimes. Clean, final. I breathed slow and deep. This was not about humiliating her. It was about ending the habit she'd built on my back. You only miss me now that I said no. The waiter reached their table. I watched the choreography. Polite apology. Card presented. Another apology. A glance toward the manager. My daughter's mouth formed an O, then a flat line. Derek argued. Gestures small but sharp, then opened his own wallet and did the math men do when they finally hit the bottom. His mother touched her pearls. His father studied the bread plate like it could offer solutions. I checked my list on the napkin. My roadmap through hell. Card frozen. Evidence saved. Alerts on. Position chosen. Voice steady. The last item I added now, speak once. Speak clearly. No revising history at the table. I slid the envelope into my purse. Left the flap showing. I wiped an imaginary crumb from the table. An old habit from 1,000 dinners I'd paid for and cleaned up after. Then I lifted my gaze and let her see me. Her eyes widened. Color drained. There it was. The crack in the mask. For a second, I saw my little girl, guilty over a broken vase. Then she looked at Derek, and the grown woman returned, calculating, choosing spin over truth. I didn't look away. I thought of all the Sunday roasts, the repairs, the babysitting, just this once. The I couldn't have done it without you, texts sent like tips to a service worker. What is love without respect? A tab with no limit. I was closing mine. Mrs. Wallace, Gabriel murmured near my shoulder. Not touching, simply present. An ally, not a savior. Good. I didn't need rescuing. I needed witnesses. I checked the time again. 8:46 p.m. Showtime wasn't about noise. It was about timing, posture, proof. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and felt that strange, steady lightness that comes when you finally stop negotiating against yourself. When I walked over, I wasn't the purse. I was the person who owned it. I stood, envelope ready as their smiles collapsed with each declined alert, lighting up my phone. I didn't march in. I arranged the scene. One breath to steady my ribs, one glance to the clock. Then I shifted 2 tables closer, close enough for them to see me, far enough that my words wouldn't carry. I set the envelope on the linen like a judge places a file. No dramatics. Position is power. Richard and Eleanor had gone quiet. My daughter was doing that quick blink calculation she's done since she was 5 and caught with a hand in the cookie jar. How much did she see? What can I fix with a smile? The waiter stood with the folio half opened, hovering between apology and retreat. I gave him the smallest nod. Stay. Witnesses matter. I pulled my phone and tapped a note as if I were checking texts. 8:46 p.m. Decline confirmed. Staff present. I could feel her watching me from the side of her eye. Good. Let her see I wasn't flustered. Let her see me writing things down. Marco drifted past with water, and like we'd rehearsed when we hadn't set a fresh glass on my table. Anything else for you, Mrs. Wallace? He asked, voice polite and clear enough to carry. Just the check, I said lightly. For my coffee. I let the words hang. My coffee, not their feast. I watched recognition settle like dust across their tablecloth. This is how you carry yourself through hell and still serve dinner. You slow down. You stack facts like plates. You do not explain. You do not plead. And you never raise your voice. If they want noise, let them make it. You bring gravity. Gabriel stationed himself at the host stand, an unobtrusive sentinel. I took inventory the way I'd taught myself to do after every disappointment these last few years. Shoulders back, chin level, hands flat, heart steady. My pulse obeyed. Another banner slid across my screen. Attempted tip adjustment 6/12, $0. Declined. A dry laugh almost escaped me. Not generous even when cornered. Of course, my daughter reached for her phone, then thought better of it and put both hands on the table like a student at a parent-teacher conference. Derek muttered to the waiter. I caught stray words. Misunderstanding? Same card? We've been here all month. The worst thing about entitlement is how ordinary it sounds when it thinks it's reasonable. I let the anger pass through me without lodging. Love without respect is a leash. I'd slipped mine. Being alone is better than being used. Say it. Breathe it. Let it make room in your chest. I slid a single sheet from the envelope and placed it on my bread plate, the summary page with dates, times, totals. I didn't need to wave it. I just needed it visible. Paper has a way of silencing fairy tales. Across the room, a couple at the window pretended not to notice, but kept glancing up. Community forms fast when truth walks in wearing a plain dress. I wasn't humiliated. I wasn't hiding. I was here. A tiny part of me remembered braiding her hair the night before her first dance, how she turned in the mirror and asked, "Do I look like someone worth choosing?" It hit me then she'd been answering that question with other people's money for years. Poor girl. Poor me for letting it go on this long. The waiter closed the folio softly, a signal that choices had to be made. Derek touched his watch again, as if time might mint cash. My daughter finally looked straight at me and didn't look away. There it was. Not panic, not even shame. Recognition. She knew exactly what this moment meant. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means you set the terms. I tucked the envelope back into my purse so the flap showed and lifted my water to my lips. When I set it down, I arranged the napkin with the same calm I'd use at Sunday dinner. I wasn't going to chase her into a story she could control. I would invite her into the truth. One last checklist in my head. Card frozen, proof printed, witnesses present, posture steady, words chosen. No monologues, one clean sentence, then silence. Let them fill it with whatever they can afford. I let her hold my gaze for 3 beats, long enough for the past to flash between us, short enough not to drown in it. Then, without hurry, I rose from my chair and turned slightly so the whole table could see me. Right on cue, I saw the flicker in the waiter's eyes before he even spoke. He'd swiped the card, walked 3 steps back toward their table, and returned with that polite apologetic tilt of the head that always means bad news. "My apologies, sir. The card has been declined." It was almost comical the way they froze. Sarah's fork hovered midair, the scallop it held wobbling. Derek blinked twice, slow and deliberate, as if the waiter had just spoken in another language. Richard and Eleanor glanced at each other, a brief, sharp exchange of looks, wealthy adjacent people who suddenly felt the floor tilt. From where I sat, I saw her try to recover. She leaned toward Derek, voice low, lips moving fast. He fished for his wallet, then stopped to scroll on his phone, probably checking the banking app. I imagined the notification staring back at him. Guarantor removed. Account frozen. That was my cue. I stood unhurried, my chair scraping the floor just enough to pull their attention. Every eye at the table turned toward me. My heels clicked softly against the marble as I closed the distance, the envelope in my hand like a sealed verdict. "Well," I said, voice calm. "Since dinner's on me, I thought I'd join you." The silence was so complete, I could hear the faint hiss from the espresso machine behind the bar. My daughter's face drained of color, then flushed high on her cheekbones. Richard and Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, their polite smiles faltering as they realized this was not a happy coincidence. I didn't sit right away. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it to the center so it rested between the water glasses. The top flap hung open just enough for the printed statements to peek out columns of dates and totals in stark black and white. "This," I said, tapping the paper with one fingertip, "is every charge made on my emergency card in the last 2 months. Luxury dinners, handbags, wine nearly 3,800 and not a grocery bill in sight." My daughter opened her mouth. I lifted my hand, palm out, not loud, not forceful, just enough to stop her. "I gave you that card for when you were home with the baby and couldn't work. I thought you needed help. I did not give it to you to entertain yourselves and your in-laws while telling me you couldn't afford to have me over for Sunday dinner." The air between us tightened. Derek tried to speak, but Eleanor's hand landed on his wrist, silencing him. She was quicker to read the room. The waiter still stood there, folio in hand. I glanced at him, then back at the table. "You'll need to settle this yourselves. I've already closed that account." Her voice finally came, shaky and thin. "Mom, You could have just— No, I cut in, my tone firm but even. I could have kept pretending, but that ends tonight. I eased into the empty chair beside Eleanor, crossing my legs and folding my hands in my lap. I wasn't here to shout. I was here to end a habit. My habit of paying for what I wasn't getting in return. My habit of mistaking financial support for love. Derek cleared his throat. We can talk about this later. There's nothing to discuss, I said. The numbers are right there, and so is my decision. The awkward silence stretched. Silverware clinked faintly as the waiter shifted his weight. My daughter stared at the receipts, but her eyes kept darting to my face like she was looking for the old softness she used to talk her way out of trouble. I didn't lean forward. I didn't lower my voice like I was sharing a secret. I wanted every word to sit plainly between us, heavy enough that they couldn't brush it aside. This, I said again, tapping the envelope, is the last meal you'll ever have at my expense. No theatrics, no raised voice, just the truth placed squarely in the middle of their table. The way you set down a bill that needs paying. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Derek's shoulders stiffened. His jaw worked like he was chewing words before spitting them out. Richard and Eleanor froze, unsure whether to look at me, at each other, or at their untouched plates. You replaced me tonight, I continued, keeping my tone even. You told me dinner was canceled, and here you are hosting your in-laws, drinking champagne, eating scallops on my dime, and you've been doing it for months. The words landed like stones dropped in water, small ripples that widened the longer the silence stretched. Derek tried again. Look, maybe there's been a— No, I said. There hasn't. The bank statements are right there. The dates match the nights you told me you were too tired to cook, or that you were sick, all while you were here, or somewhere like it, running up charges and letting me believe it was necessity. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass, but she didn't drink. She set it back down and pressed her palms to her thighs. Mom, You don't get to smooth this over, I said quietly. Not with Mom, and not with excuses. You've taken advantage. You've lied. And worse, you've made it normal. The truth hung there, raw and unpolished. No one moved. Even the waiter, still holding the folio, stood as if rooted in place. Eleanor cleared her throat. I didn't realize. Of course you didn't, I said, meeting her eyes. Because they wanted it to look effortless. That's what money does when it comes without strings. It hides who's holding it up, but I'm cutting the strings. My daughter looked like she'd swallowed something sharp. Her eyes darted to the envelope, then back to me, searching for some sliver of softness to pry open. I gave her none. This isn't about the money, I said, leaning back in my chair. It's about the fact that you thought my presence was optional, but my wallet was required. That stops now. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but I recognized the calculation behind them. She'd always been able to cry on cue when backed into a corner. It was a skill I'd never mastered myself. We were going to pay you back, she whispered, voice catching. We're just going through a rough patch. A rough patch that involves champagne and caviar, I asked, my tone not unkind, just factual. A rough patch that somehow includes a 2,400 handbag and a gold watch. Derek's face darkened. Those were gifts. From whom, I asked. Knowing the answer, Sarah looked down at her hands. From each other. I let the silence expand, the kind that forces truth to the surface like air bubbles in water. Gifts paid for on my emergency card, I said finally. Gifts you gave each other while telling me you couldn't afford to fix your oven. Eleanor gasped softly. Richard's face had taken on a rigid quality, the look of someone witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Did you know, I said, addressing them directly, that while your son and daughter-in-law have been hosting you at these lovely dinners, they've told me repeatedly they're struggling, that they can't afford to visit, can't afford repairs, can't afford the basics. Eleanor's eyes widened. But they just took us to the Hamptons last month. We stayed in a beachfront property. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's tears dried instantly. Her gaze darted to Derek, whose face had gone from dark to thunderous. "I had no idea," I said, my voice steady despite the fresh betrayal. "But I'm not surprised." I stood then, leaving the envelope exactly where it was, the top page still showing the totals in neat, undeniable print. I wanted her to have to look at it every time her eyes drifted down. "You'll figure out how to cover the bill," I said. 4 ways sounds fair. I didn't rush for the exit. I moved to the bar and stood there ordering nothing, just letting them feel the shape of my absence while the bill sat like a landmine in the middle of their table. The waiter cleared his throat. "How would you like to settle, sir?" he asked Derek. "Split it evenly," I called over my shoulder, my tone light but carrying. 4 ways. Derek twisted in his seat, his face tight. "That's ridiculous." "No," I said, turning just enough to meet his eyes. "That's fair. You invited 4 people. 4 people can pay. For a heartbeat." No one moved. Then Eleanor fished her wallet from her bag. Cheeks flushed a deep pink. Richard followed, flipping open a leather billfold with a resigned sigh. Derek glared at my daughter, who sat perfectly still, staring at the table like she might disappear into the grain. "This is humiliating," Derek muttered. "Not as humiliating as being used," I said evenly. The waiter began splitting the check without another word. The only sound was the quiet shuffle of cards being pulled from wallets, the faint scratch of a pen as signatures landed. I thought about every time I'd slipped her money for just this once emergencies, believing her when she swore she'd pay me back. I thought about the excuses that always came later: an unexpected bill, a car repair, a sick child. I'd covered those costs without hesitation, and while I was counting pennies, she was counting on me to keep the show going. They didn't speak to each other while the transaction processed. Sarah didn't even glance my way. When the waiter returned with the receipts, he handed each one separately. Derek signed quickly, his handwriting sharp, almost angry. Richard and Eleanor signed in silence. Sarah held the pen longer than necessary, her fingers tightening around it before she scrawled her name. She didn't look up when she passed the folio back. "Thank you," the waiter said quietly. And for the first time all evening, the words felt like they were meant for me. I picked up my purse from the bar and walked toward the door. No lingering, no second glances. I'd said what needed saying, and the rest was theirs to sit with. As I stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around me, cleaner than the thick, uncomfortable air I'd left behind. The restaurant door closed softly behind me, muting whatever conversation or silence followed at that table. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter in a way I hadn't in years because I'd finally taken myself off the hook I'd hung on their wall. I walked to my car without looking back, my heels clicking steady on the pavement, the envelope safe in my bag, evidence, proof, and a reminder should I ever need it. Of the night I decided enough was enough. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, I knew one thing for certain: I'd never sit at their table the same way again. The drive home felt different. Not quiet, but uncluttered. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't looping through unpaid debts of the heart, ways I might soften the blow next time, how I could help without feeling used. That loop was gone. At a red light, I pulled the envelope from my purse and set it on the passenger seat. The neat columns of charges stared back at me. Each date was a little knife, but instead of twisting, they cut me free. I didn't need to keep it as ammunition anymore. It was a record, nothing more, of what I'd finally stopped allowing. As I drove, my phone buzzed, once, twice, 3 times. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Sarah, no doubt, with a barrage of texts ranging from anger to apology. I'd read them later, when I was steady enough to see them for what they were. Then, unexpectedly, the phone rang. The caller ID showed not Sarah's name, but Derek's. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he had to say could wait until tomorrow, when emotions weren't so raw. When I reached my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment. The porch light glowed faintly, the way it always had when I was married, waiting for someone to come home. For years, I'd been the one keeping lights on for everyone else. Tonight, I walked into a house where the only person I needed to account for was me. I set my purse on the counter, pulled open the drawer where I kept my financial papers, and found the spare emergency card, the one I'd kept tucked away, thinking there might be a day when she truly needed it. I ran my thumb along its smooth edge, remembering the day I'd handed her the first one, how she'd hugged me, promised it was just until things get better. With one clean motion, I took the scissors from the drawer and cut it in half. The sound was sharper than I expected. Final. It wasn't just about the card. It was about reclaiming every inch of ground I'd given away in the name of keeping peace. I'd mistaken constant giving for love. But love without respect is just a transaction. And tonight I'd closed my tab. I sat down at my kitchen table and finally looked at my phone. 5 texts from Sarah, 1 from Derek, and strangely, 1 from Eleanor. Sarah's messages ran the gamut I'd expected. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. You completely misunderstood the situation. I can't believe you humiliated us like that. Derek is furious. His parents think I've been lying to them. Please, Mom, call me. I'm sorry. Derek's was shorter. Ruth, we need to discuss this like adults. Call when you're ready. Eleanor's surprised me. Ruth, I had no idea what was happening. I think we should talk. Just us. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. Room 412. I set the phone down without responding to any of them. Not tonight. Tonight was for me. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my back porch, and watched the stars. The night was quiet, but not lonely. There's a difference between being alone and being used. One heals. The other bleeds you dry. My phone buzzed again. Sarah. I silenced it and slipped it into my pocket. I thought about what came next. The difficult conversations. The boundaries I'd need to draw. The relationships that would have to be rebuilt from the ground up, if they could be rebuilt at all. But those were tomorrow's problems. Tonight, I just needed to breathe. I remembered something my mother told me years ago, when I was going through my divorce. The first night is the hardest. After that, you remember how to sleep alone. She was right. The first step is always the steepest, but I'd taken it, and I was still standing. The cool breeze rustled the leaves in my garden. The sound was peaceful, like gentle applause. I breathed it in and felt, for the first time in a long while, that I was exactly where I needed to be. A week passed. 7 days of texts and calls I didn't answer. Not because I was punishing her, but because I needed time to find my footing on this new ground. I did, however, meet with Eleanor for coffee the day after the incident. She'd come alone, leaving Richard at the hotel. I had no idea, she'd said, her hands wrapped around her mug. We thought they were doing well. Derek talks about promotions, big accounts. Sarah always looks so put together. I finished for her. She nodded. Expensive, and I never questioned it. I should have known better. We believe what we want to believe about our children, I said. It wasn't an accusation, just a truth. Eleanor's eyes had misted. Richard and I are flying home tomorrow. We're reassessing some things, including how much we've been enabling them by not asking questions. We'd parted with a hug and a promise to stay in touch. Sometimes strangers become allies in the strangest ways. Now, 7 days later, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I knew who it was before I looked out the window. Sarah, alone. I opened the door before she could knock. She stood on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back. None of the usual armor. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice uncertain. Sarah, I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. The house was quiet around us, just the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Would you like some tea? I asked. She nodded, following me to the kitchen. Old habits, old paths, but we both knew we were walking them differently now. I filled the kettle, set out cups. We moved around each other with the careful choreography of people who once knew each other intimately, but now weren't sure where the boundaries lay. Derek wanted to come, she said finally, sitting at the table. I told him no. This needed to be just us. I nodded. appreciating at least that much awareness. He's angry, she continued. At you, at me, at his parents, everyone? I'm not surprised, I said, keeping my tone neutral. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over tea bags, the steam rising between us like a veil. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. I'm so sorry, Mom. I set the cups down and took a seat across from her. For what exactly? I asked. Not to be cruel, but to be clear. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they seemed genuine. For all of it, using your card, lying about why we couldn't see you, making you feel like you weren't important while we spent your money entertaining other people. I let the words hang in the air. Acknowledgement was the first step. What I don't understand, I said finally, is why. You know I would have helped if you were really struggling. I always have. Why the deception? She stared into her tea like it might hold answers. It started small. The card was for emergencies, like you said, and there were some real ones. But then, I don't know, it became so easy. Derek lost his job 6 months ago. The revelation hit me hard. It's 6 months, but you never said anything. He didn't want anyone to know, not his parents, not you. He was too proud. He kept saying he'd find something better. But nothing came through. We burned through our savings trying to keep up appearances. Appearances for whom? I asked. Not for me. I would have understood. For everyone, she whispered. His parents have always had money. They expect a certain lifestyle. And our friends? Everyone's always posting their perfect lives online. Perfect homes. Perfect vacations. It felt like we were falling behind. So you created a perfect life with my credit card, I said. She winced but didn't deny it. I told myself it was temporary, that we'd pay you back when things turned around. But it just kept escalating. The dinners got more expensive. The gifts became bigger. We were trying to fill something. I think something that money couldn't actually fix. I thought about all the times she'd seemed anxious, checking her phone, making excuses to leave early. I'd attributed it to the stress of motherhood, of a young career, never to this. Where does this leave us? I asked. She looked up, surprised by the directness of the question. I don't know, she admitted. I want to fix it. I want to pay you back every penny. It might take time, but I will. It was never about the money, I said. I know. It was about trust. And I broke that. We sat in silence for a moment, the truth settling between us like dust after a storm. Derek and I are starting counseling, she said finally. Financial and marriage. His parents finding out hit him hard. He's applying for jobs he wouldn't have considered before. More modest positions. And you? I'm selling things, the bag, the jewelry, all of it. It never really felt like mine anyway. And I'm taking extra shifts at work. I nodded, absorbing the information without comment. I miss you, Mom, she said, her voice breaking. I miss Sunday dinners and just talking, being honest. I miss that too, I admitted. But it can't go back to how it was. You understand that, right? She nodded, wiping a tear. I know. I don't expect it to. I hope we can build something new, something better. I reached across the table and took her hand, not a full embrace, not yet, but a beginning. New boundaries, I said. Real ones this time. Yes, she agreed. Real ones. And complete honesty. No more hiding behind perfect Instagram posts or designer bags. I promise. I squeezed her hand once, then let go. It will take time, Sarah. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I know, she said quietly, but I'm willing to try if you are. Outside, the late afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Time passing, changing everything it touched. I am, I said finally, but we take it slow. She nodded, relief washing over her face. Thank you, Mom. Don't thank me yet, I warned. The road back is longer than the road out. But as I looked at her, my daughter, stripped of pretense, sitting in the same kitchen where she'd once stood with a baby on her hip asking for help, I felt a flicker of hope. Not for what was, but for what could be. A relationship built on truth instead of transactions. Love with respect, not just need. It would be different, but different didn't have to mean worse. Over the next months, we found our way toward a new normal. Sarah and Derek sold their oversized house and moved into a modest townhome closer to my neighborhood. The baby, my grandson. Tommy spent more time with me, not because they needed childcare, but because they wanted him to know me. Eleanor called every few weeks, a friendship neither of us had expected blossoming across the miles. She and Richard had made their own changes, she told me. Less focus on appearances, more on substance. They'd started volunteering at a community garden in their retirement community. Richard was teaching woodworking to local kids. Sometimes it takes a shock to wake you up, she said during one call. I'm oddly grateful for that night at Lavetta, though I'd never tell Derek that. Derek, for his part, had found a job at a smaller firm. Less prestige, better hours. He was home for dinner most nights. Sarah told me, reading bedtime stories to Tommy instead of sending emails from the couch. Our Sunday dinners resumed, but with a key difference. They were potluck now, everyone contributing. Sometimes at my house, sometimes at theirs. Simple food, real conversation. The first time Sarah hosted, I noticed her hands shaking slightly as she set out the dishes' mismatched plates. Simple pasta, homemade bread. No champagne, no caviar, just honest food made with care. It's not fancy, she'd apologized. It's perfect, I'd told her, and meant it. The hardest conversations happened in small moments, usually when we were doing something else. Washing dishes, folding laundry, walking through the park with Tommy toddling ahead. I was jealous, she admitted once, as we deadheaded roses in my garden. Of the way Derek's parents lived, the ease they had with money. I wanted that for us, for Tommy. Money doesn't make parenting easier, I said. Just different problems, she nodded, clipping a spent bloom. I know that now, but I wanted to be impressive. To them, to our friends, to myself, maybe. And now, she'd looked at me then, really looked. Now I want to be trustworthy. That seems more important. I held her gaze, seeing the daughter I'd raised and the woman she was becoming. Not perfect. None of us are. But trying. It is. I agreed. Trust grew back slowly, like a garden after winter. Not all at once. And not without setbacks. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to resurface. But we were both vigilant now, recognizing the signs. My boundaries remained firm. No more loans, no more emergency cards. But I found other ways to support them that didn't involve money. Babysitting Tommy while they attended financial counseling, teaching Sarah to cook budget-friendly meals from scratch, listening without judgment as they navigated their new reality. Derek struggled the most with the changes. His pride had taken the hardest hit, and rebuilding his relationship with his parents proved challenging. But I saw small shifts in him, too. Less arrogance, more humility. He started joining me in the garden occasionally, learning the patience it takes to grow things from seed. My father never taught me practical skills, he confessed one afternoon as we staked tomato plants. It was all about appearance, achievement, never about building something with your hands. It's never too late to learn, I told him. He nodded, carefully tying the green stem to its support. I want Tommy to know both, how to succeed and how to just be. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. 3 months after that night at Lavetta, Sarah brought me an envelope. Inside was a check for $500, the first installment on repaying the $3,800. It's not much, she said, but it's a start. I looked at the check, then back at her. Keep it, I said. Put it in Tommy's college fund instead. Her eyes widened. But Mom, I need to pay you back. You are, I said, just not with money. She understood then. I think that what I wanted wasn't reimbursement but recognition, not the dollars, but the respect they represented. The real payment was in the changed relationship, the honest conversations, the genuine inclusion in their lives, not as a financial safety net, but as a mother, a grandmother, a person with value beyond what I could provide. That night, I added a final entry to the list I'd started at Lavetta. Remember what matters. 6 months to the day after that fateful dinner, Sarah invited me over for a special meal. Nothing fancy, she promised on the phone. Just family. When I arrived, I found the small dining table in their townhome set with care. Simple white plates. Cloth napkins I recognized from my own linen closet, a housewarming gift, and a centerpiece of fresh flowers from their garden. Derek greeted me at the door, Tommy on his hip. "Welcome, Ruth," he said, and there was a warmth there that felt new, not performative, but genuine. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Her face was flushed from cooking, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger somehow, unburdened. "Perfect timing," she said, kissing my cheek. "Dinner's just ready." As we gathered around the table, I noticed something else, no phones in sight, no pausing to document the meal for social media, no checking for emails or messages, just presence. Sarah served a simple roast chicken, vegetables from my garden, fresh bread she'd learned to make in a class she was taking at the community center. The meal wasn't Instagram-worthy by conventional standards, no exotic ingredients, no artful plating, but it was made with care and served with love. As we ate, the conversation flowed easily. Derek shared stories from his new job, where he was finding unexpected satisfaction in mentoring younger colleagues. Sarah talked about a freelance project she'd taken on to supplement their income. I told them about the travel group I'd joined, finally taking those trips I'd been putting off. "I'm going to Santa Fe next month," I said, "a painting retreat." "That's wonderful, Mom," Sarah said, and her smile reached her eyes. "You always wanted to learn to paint." "It's never too late," I replied, echoing what I'd told Derek months earlier. Tommy banged his spoon on the high chair, demanding attention. We all laughed, the sound natural and unforced. After dinner, as Derek cleared the dishes, another new development. Sarah pulled me aside. She handed me a small box, wrapped simply in brown paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it," she urged. Inside was a framed photograph, not a recent one, but one from years ago. Sarah and me in the kitchen of our old house, flour on our noses, laughing as we attempted to make Christmas cookies. She couldn't have been more than 12. "I found it when we were moving," she said. "I thought you might like to have it." I traced the edge of the frame, feeling the weight of the moment. "I remember this day," I said. "The cookies were terrible, but we had fun," she added. "That's what I've been thinking about lately, how somewhere along the way, I forgot what actually matters. It's not the perfect meal or the designer bag. It's this," she gestured to the photo, "being real with each other." I hugged her then, a real hug, not the perfunctory embrace we'd been sharing for years. She held on tight, like she used to when she was little. "I'm still learning," she whispered against my shoulder. "But I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do," I told her. Later, as we sat in their small living room with cups of tea, Tommy asleep in Derek's lap, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. There would still be hard days, disagreements, moments when old patterns threatened to emerge. But something fundamental had shifted. The relationship wasn't transactional anymore. It was reciprocal, give and take, honesty and boundaries, love and respect in equal measure. "Mom," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I wanted to ask you something." "What is it?" I responded, setting down my tea. "Would you teach me to make Grandma's pot roast, the one you used to make for Sunday dinners when I was little?" Such a simple request, but it meant everything. Not asking for money or favors, but for connection, for tradition, for the kind of wealth that doesn't deplete when shared. "I'd love to," I said. "Next Sunday," she nodded, smiling. Next Sunday. As I drove home that night, I thought about the long road we'd traveled in 6 short months, From betrayal to beginnings, from transactions to trust. I thought about the phrase that had become my mantra that night at Livetta: love without respect is nothing but servitude. But its corollary was equally true. Love with respect is freedom. Freedom to give without resentment. Freedom to receive without guilt. Freedom to be imperfect together. The next morning, I woke early and did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to Livetta for breakfast. Alone. I sat at my usual table by the window, ordered coffee and pastry, and simply enjoyed the moment. Marco spotted me and came over with a smile. "Good to see you, Mrs. Wallace. It's been a while." "It has," I agreed. "But I'm back now. Not as someone's wallet or safety net, not as a servant to anyone else's needs, but as myself, Ruth Wallace, mother, grandmother, gardener, soon-to-be painter. A woman who had learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply to say enough, and in that enough, to find finally that she is more than enough herself. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below.